Hello and welcome to Securing the Nation's Network, a GovExec 360 Insight Show, brought to you by AT&T. I'm your host, George Jackson. As cyber attacks become more frequent and complex, the real-world consequences of network security failures can be felt across the nation. After an executive order issued by the Biden White House, government agencies are reshaping their approaches to cybersecurity. The network environment has evolved rapidly over the past 20 years. Today, a dynamic, holistic security approach is more needed than ever to protect government agencies and the citizens they serve. Earlier this year, GovExec published an expert dialogue that explored how IT leaders are developing new measures to secure the nation's network. Today, I'm excited to continue that conversation with a few of the experts who contributed to it. Brian Gattoni is Chief Technology Officer at CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Devon Tyler is Chief Information Security Officer at the Department of Treasury's United States Mint. And Owen Rogers is Area Vice President of Engineering and Architecture for Federal at AT&T Public Sector. Brian, kick us off. Who are you? What do you do at CISA?
Thanks, George. I appreciate y'all inviting me to participate in today's event. As you said, my name is Brian Gattoni, and I serve as the Chief Technology Officer for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA. As CISA's Chief Technology Officer, I'm responsible for the technical vision and the strategic alignment of the agency's data and mission services that help manage risk to federal networks and critical infrastructure. If you're not familiar with CISA, CISA is one of the newest agencies in the government, and it's our mission to protect the nation's critical infrastructure from both physical and cyber threats. It's through this mission, it's our responsibility to protect the functions of government and the private sector that are so vital to the United States that their disruption, corruption, or dysfunction would have a debilitating effect on security, national economic security, or national public health and safety. These critical services include the water we drink, our federal systems, the electricity that lights our homes, and the gas we get at the fuel pumps. For physical hazards, CISA works across sectors to conduct and facilitate vulnerability and consequence assessments that help our partners understand and address risks to critical infrastructure. In emergency communications, CISA is the national focal point for ensuring that national security and emergency responder communications are up and running. And for this conversation, in cybersecurity, we focus on the most significant threat actors. Gaining visibility and taking action against these threat actors requires daily collaboration with our partners in industry, the intelligence community, and law enforcement.
Brian, quick follow-up. I get tech vision, but what about strategic alignment? How would you define that?
So strategic alignment is probably the most interesting part of my job. I'm a technologist at heart, but understanding how to apply that technology in a meaningful way to the strategy of the agency as we seek to disrupt threats and ensure that they do not disrupt our national critical functions is really how we make the rubber meet the road, and we apply the advancements in emerging technology to our mission in a couple of interesting ways. I look at technology from three distinct vantage points when I look to align it strategically. One, what if we adopt that technology for our mission? How does it help our operators do our job on a daily basis? Two, what about our stakeholders in critical infrastructure, in industry, and in other federal agencies? When they go to adopt that emerging technology, what does it do to their risk profile? Does it increase their cybersecurity posture? Does it add additional risk areas that we all have to work together to mitigate? And how do we think about that in partnership with each other? And then, because our adversaries get a vote, we tend to think about how advancing technologies may enable their goals, and then do a bit of analysis to put ourselves in the best position with our partners to protect national critical functions and deny our adversaries their intentions.
Devon, before we went on the air, you mentioned that you've been at Mint for about 2 years at this point. I think that perspective is so interesting because you joined the organization highly IT focused in the work that you do, but you joined in the middle of a pandemic when everything really shifted. What does your day-to-day look like, and how is it different from maybe it was before?
So that's interesting. So I joined in October and December. That was SolarWinds. So it was an interesting time to actually learn about cybersecurity and coming into Mint and really help them to traverse that event, as well as to improve our cybersecurity at the Mint. So it's been an interesting journey helping Mint to not only go from where they are today, but help them to move forward the zero trust journey and really deliver capability that's going to help us to secure the Mint. You made a really good point. CISA is a new agency. Mint's been around for quite some time, so there's a lot of things that are already there, and it's taken some time to quietly to identify what we have and really start to work to secure what we have.
What about you, Owen? Tell us a little bit about yourself, the sort of elements that fit in your portfolio at AT&T.
Sure. So my organization has historically been one that built a lot of network services. So going back to the 90s, right, people were building frame relay networks and they transitioned to MPLS networks. And I will concede that security in some ways was, if not an afterthought, it was considered to be a point on the network. Going back 10 or 15 years, when the TIC program was created, that was a perimeter security function that it served as a gateway from what was considered a trusted network to the broader untrusted internet. What my organization is doing these days is figuring out how are we going to work with agencies throughout the federal government to take security and not just put it at a perimeter point of the network, but to embed it directly into the network. So the devices that were previously passing data, sorting it for priority, is this voice, is this web traffic, are now also going to be performing policy decisions on traffic. Also going down to the endpoint, which was traditionally something that a telecom didn't really look at in an enterprise context.
Yeah.
They're going to be, we're going to be injecting, functions that review traffic, flag for potential malicious activity, and then also pass information back to the core. And in the core, what was traditionally something that was there to just pass data as quickly as possible, what we're now looking to do is to take and have a policy repository that will then be distributed throughout the network. So it's really creating this entire imbued function of security that goes in everything that we do.
Brian, at the top of the program, I mentioned President Biden's cybersecurity executive order put out last May, about a year at this point, and massive policy documents like that have a long tail on them, a long time before things are fully implemented, if ever fully implemented. But I want to kick off this portion of our program with your sense of momentum. How has the momentum really changed even over the past few months around cybersecurity in government?
I think the momentum continues to push based on the threats we continue to experience, right? Devon was exactly right. Some people who've joined in the past few years have joined either right before or right after some extremely significant events in cybersecurity. Couple of things we've been doing here to keep that momentum and improving our skills and being responsive to the cyber EO has been working very hard to centralize visibility to improve detection of cybersecurity incidents on federal government networks. This one's pretty simple. The earlier we can detect irregular activity on a federal network, the earlier we're able to assess the activity, investigate the cause, share information, and activate a response sooner. And in order to improve our detection of cyber incidents, we've also been working to remove barriers to share threat information between government and private sector. One way we do this, right, by modernizing and implementing stronger cybersecurity standards across the federal government, is looking at those cloud journeys, those zero trust maturity model journeys, and helping develop a standard for all the government to follow. Each of our partners in the department agency, as Devon rightfully pointed out, have been around longer than CISA. They've got a rich history, they've built their own capabilities over time, and they're at a different point in their own cybersecurity journey from where we are. And we have to meet them where their journey is by providing standardized guidance of how we get to zero trust. So we've published a cloud security technical reference architecture and a zero trust maturity model that allows each of our agencies to see where they should be going, plot their point in time, and work in partnership with everybody else to mature their capabilities.
Devon, I want to steal one of Brian's phrases there, remove barriers. To his point and your point earlier, Mint has been around a while, and it takes some time to turn a massive ship like that in the direction that you want to lead it. What are some common barriers that you've run into in your short time at Mint that you are working to address as this cybersecurity momentum keeps pushing forward?
So it's interesting. So I think the first thing we did was leverage what CISA had developed and really help to identify where we were, whether or not we had traditional or advanced, and really start to plot that course. Something that's been significant for us, being a manufacturing bureau, is really understanding what was going on in the manufacturing environment and really getting into that environment. So traditionally we've been IT, but we started to really chart the course into OT and start to develop capabilities in the OT environment and merge those with the IT environment so that we can make sure that we have a holistic approach to zero trust.
Holistic approach, Owen, what do you think of that? How does it comport with what you hear all across the public sector?
Yeah, I think it's a great term, and it really gets back to what I was saying in the open, right? We need to be able to connect what's going on in the center of the network with what's going on at the edge, with what's going on at the endpoint. And in a manufacturing context, that endpoint is often not something that's got a lot of robust computing capabilities to it. I'm talking about things like Internet of Things types of devices, right? That need to have some sort of form of external monitoring. So you need to have a holistic strategy. I'm going to steal that line, by the way. Yeah. You need to have some sort of holistic strategy that says when data is passing from one device in my network to another or through an application, how is it going to get monitored? How am I going to confirm that the device and the user are who they claim to be? And then how do I make sure that data doesn't leave my network to some place that it's not supposed to be?
Brian, a lot to unpack there. IoT and monitoring are two things that I'm going to pull on that you're intimately familiar with, but that landscape has changed quite a bit over the past 2 years. Big percentage of the federal workforce moving remote. What does that look like today? What does the conversation around IoT and monitoring in government look like today?
Sure. So let's talk about what changes and what doesn't. What changes is the number of devices, the number of connections, the number of ways federal employees and citizens are accessing the services of the government to either do their jobs or to get their services as citizens. What doesn't change is the need to have the visibility into each of those devices, each of those data sets, each of those users, each of those connections. And that's really part of the zero trust journey. And so when we put the zero trust maturity model together with the 5 pillars, we did so very consciously about separating identity and device and the network and the application workload and the data, because each one of those requires a unique combination of visibility, of orchestration and security posture to continually establish trust as people access the data they need. When we moved from our office environments where I'm at now to our home environments during the pandemic, we changed a lot of connection paradigms, but I think it was all for the better, right? It was a galvanizing moment to harness the technologies that were there to advance that remote workforce, but it was coming anyway. It just accelerated that journey with the urgency necessary for everybody to get behind it. There was less of the budget barriers or the strategy barriers. There was a urgent call to improve our security right away. And I think the federal government did a great job doing so, along with our industry partners.
That dialogue between CISA and all of federal government, critically important, but Devon, the dialogue that you have with your colleagues at Mint, the people that report to you, or the agency at large is equally important. How has that changed? And I'm thinking, training, email-based communications, the simple blocking and tackling that agencies have to do from a security standpoint on a daily basis.
So we'll start off with saying it's transparency. So we really started to take cybersecurity and take it out of the silo and really into what the Bureau does and communicate it out to not only just the CIO, but other executive leaderships at Mint, so they really understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. One of the things I noticed with the breach that happened December 2020 was that there was a lot of information on the news and not necessarily what was going on internally. So we started to shift the approach from an internal IT and then start communicating out to the rest of the stakeholders. One of the things that happened in Treasury is that we do a lot of inter-bureau communication. So there's a lot of CISO-to-CISO conversation that happens between us and others, as well as the CISA calls as well too, that we get on and really inform what we're doing. But it's really that normalization of we're going to talk, we're going to communicate, we're going to figure out what we're all doing to make sure we all have a path forward. So it's that teamwork that's happening.
Yeah, I think people underestimate how big and how complicated isn't the right word, but maybe nuanced the Department of Treasury is.
Yes.
Which agencies or organizations or sub-agencies are you consistently communicating with?
Yeah, so for us, I mean, we have a sister agency, Bureau of Engraving and Printing. They print the dollars, we make the coins. So it's a natural relationship for us to figure out what are they doing in that manufacturing space and what are we doing in our manufacturing space, as well as constant communication up the Treasury Department officer to the CISA over there to really inform what they're doing to make sure they understand what we're doing and they can communicate that out to CISAs and other.
Owen, as we wrap this first portion of our conversation, I don't want to give short shrift to the phrase zero trust that Brian raised earlier. How do you define that? How do you approach it from a network standpoint?
Yeah, so Brian and his team over at CISA, together with the people at NIST, have done a really great job of providing some, I would say, a framework or markers for what a zero trust environment looks like. So what we try to do is we are evaluating everything holistically, is to look at how there are integration points between the various different technologies and capabilities that are required to create a zero trust environment. So when we're looking at potential vendor partners in supporting our agency networks, we're looking at does vendor A that says that they do this integrate well with vendor B, and can we test it and confirm it so that the entire platform works as intended, and in support of that zero trust framework that's been put forward by NIST and supported by CISA.
So Brian, we talked about it a little bit in the first part of our program. Collaboration is key. Why don't you foot stomp that for us? What does collaboration mean at CISA?
One of our top priorities for CISA has been to deepen operational collaboration across sectors. You may be asking yourself, what exactly is operational collaboration? It's the movement from information sharing to information enabling, the active exchange of data in real time that can be actioned in order to improve security, where the government is transparent and responsive and not a black box, and where you don't need a PhD in government studies to understand how to interact with the federal cybersecurity ecosystem. This is why Congress built CISA to be America's cyber defense agency, that front door for the private sector to work with before, during, and after incidents to help build the resilience and security of our nation as part of a collective cyber defense. Only by deepening our partnerships are we able to share information broadly about threats and vulnerabilities and enable early warning and prevent others from being attacked. And as we've been focused on cultivating partnerships across sectors, CISA has also been keenly focused on working to establish a stronger bond with companies who have a unique visibility into the threat landscape. To support this goal, last year CISA launched the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, or the JCDC. This has been a bit of an incubator for the operational collaboration model that we're looking to achieve across all sectors with our federal partners, with industry, with everybody. And I'd say it's been a success, both in what it's been able to do, as well as what it has taught us in terms of lessons learned and about some of our blind spots.
I'd also like to learn about what collaboration looks like between Mint and the constituents that you serve, the taxpayers. What does that relationship look like? What type of information are you depending on from them? And long term, what are you sort of hoping to deliver to them from a collaboration standpoint?
So it's great to be at Mint because Mint has a direct relationship with the constituents because we serve them through two different ways, selling a product via our website, which is collectible items, as well as distributing coins that they can use as stores in other places as vending machines. So it's a great relationship. I think we find out very directly how well we're doing via the products that we sell, as well as via our website and our collaboration out with the customer. There's a help desk that they can call into if they're having issues buying the coins. So we have a direct relationship. We also have partners that we partner with internal to the Mint to understand exactly what direction we should be going, and in the collaboration between us and what we should be selling at the Mint.
So Owen, jump in here. What is the ideal collaboration scenario, public and private? What does that look like?
So I think the key word here, George, is diversity. In the world of industry, we kind of have a couple of different buckets that we could put our suppliers into, right? We have essentially integrators, people who bring a lot of different technologies to the table to try to achieve a broader goal.
Sure.
And you have specific technology vendors that are accomplishing one or a multitude of functions in a cybersecurity type of environment. And I would say agency leadership, cybersecurity thought leaders, can really benefit by listening to a diversity of voices around cybersecurity. So this can mean bringing in a couple of different integrators to talk about what could be a potential path forward toward a zero trust type of vision. And then also hearing from technology companies about how they can achieve specific parts of that vision. I think if we're being, forthright about it, there are times when agencies wind up hearing from one or two different suppliers in an area, and then they can wind up hearing that story only.
Brian, I'm going to pull on that thread, broader strategy, because it also requires modernization. Follow me here just for a moment, but the TMF, the Technology Modernization Fund, there was huge demand associated with it, especially with the COVID-related or relief-related funding that came out of Congress over the past couple of years. How do you look at the TMF, take cues for this JCDC incubator? What other areas of focus should agencies across government be really drilling down on when they apply for TMF funding?
Sure. So smart IT investments are integral to the federal government's mission and ensure that we're balancing the immediate needs of agencies as well as the congressional intent for the additional technology modernization funding received under the American Rescue Plan last year. The TMF released a new set of guidance last spring to strengthen and prioritize projects that ensure agile IT modernization becomes the norm across federal government. The projects delivered since the new guidance was released prioritizes programs and assets that cut across agencies, address immediate security gaps, and improve the public's ability to access government services. The new guidelines ensure that the TMF provides additional means for agencies to deliver services to the American public more quickly, better secure sensitive systems and data, and use taxpayer dollars more efficiently. The TMF board is dedicated to selecting high-impact projects that will significantly improve the cybersecurity maturity across the entire federal enterprise. And the board's also dedicated to selecting projects that prioritize high-priority systems and improve public-facing digital services. Due to the increasing importance and demand for TMF requests, CIS has dramatically increased our participation on the TMF board. Our own Deputy Assistant Director for Cybersecurity serves as a board member, and we've added several additional senior staff members last year to support the TMF board in reviewing and evaluating submissions from agencies that directly align with Zero Trust.
Devon, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but you don't benefit directly from TMF funding. Is that right?
That's correct. MINT's a non-appropriated agency / bureau, so we don't necessarily receive funds for TMF. But we do get to work with others to understand exactly what they're going to do with TMF funds, so we can align what our strategy is and making sure that we're not going down a road that no one else is. So it really does help us to at least make sure that the technology that we're putting in place is where the other partners in the federal space is going as well.
So Devon raises an interesting point here, Owen, and I'd like to expand on it a little bit. Tell me if I'm reading this right, but it seems like the TMF, the Technology Modernization Fund, not only a source of funding, a mechanism for agencies to modernize their organization's information technology, but also a source of best practices where the government can look, take those techniques, take those approaches, and kind of seed them across their organizations. Am I reading that right?
I think you are, yeah. And it also allows them to work outside of the traditional budget process in order to find those specific things that are needed. Brian talked a little bit about filling immediate gaps, and that's really important when you're talking about cybersecurity. Throughout the year, you identify areas that you really need some augmentation, and that's where TMF can be a big help.
Brian, I'm going to go off script here for a moment, and everybody says, whoa boy, whoa-oh, but I read this report that I referenced at the top of the program probably 3 or 4 times ahead of this taping here, and Multi-factor authentication seemed to be something that you are really keenly focused on. I think it's relevant to this securing the network conversation. I'm hoping you can tell our audience what MFA means to you and what are some current trend lines you're following there.
Sure. So multi-factor authentication, MFA, is probably the most acute way any individual can contribute to the cybersecurity posture of themselves or any enterprise that they interact with. For those that aren't familiar with multi-factor authentication, there are many ways that you can tell the computer systems you are who you say you are. You could just put in one factor, your name, and then add a password to it. And then for those of you that may already be participating in a two-step verification process, usually found in e-commerce sites, you might get a text to your phone that says enter a one-time code. There's also additional tokens and devices. For us in the federal government, we have our identification cards that have a little chip in them that we put in our computers. These are all different factors that you use at the same time. Tell the computers, all right, who you are, validate it by something you are or something you have, right? A biometric or a token. Any individual can do this because there are free services out there right now that you can use in your personal life, and you should be pushing your CIO or IT operations shop to make sure that multi-factor authentication is available for you in your professional life. The numbers we're seeing is 98% more secure when you're using multi-factor authentication over the use of a password alone. So again, it is the single most significant step any individual can take to contribute to the cybersecurity posture for themselves or for any enterprise interacting with. MFA is the way to go.
Devon, MFA is the way to go. How does Mint approach MFA?
It's almost the same way as everyone else. I think when the order came in pause, it was really that time to really pause, identify what we had, and then go back to the drawing board for things that were not compatible with MFA and start to craft a strategy to get it to MFA. I agree with them. It's the approach to really help us to provide that first stop to security. If you're in, you're going to need two other ways to get into the system, so we're going to make life a little bit harder on you. It's been great to communicate with our development team, our application team, as well as the operational team to really help them to modernize our approach to authentication and help us to roll out different strategies, especially when it comes to our manufacturing OT environment, to really push in more security there too, and making sure that we have MFA in that environment as well too. So again, that holistic approach to cybersecurity and zero trust that goes into manufacturing and IT and bringing everyone up to the same speed.
What does this have to do with threat detection, Owen?
So MFA specifically and threat detection are probably only tangentially related. However, threat detection itself covers an awful lot of things that we at AT&T try to work on with our federal clients. So, for example, there is the traditional sort of watching for patterns of behavior that may indicate that there's been a breach of security. There is the collection and dissemination through some of the processes that CIS has put in place for threats throughout the federal government and into shops like Devon's. And then there's also the ability to monitor federal traffic as a service provider, something that AT&T is very experienced in. And what we are able to do is provide an extra layer of monitoring as traffic is going out over the public network to identify what might be problematic traffic leaving a federal agency. This could be things like traffic going to a third party if there's been a compromise internally, to capture it on its way out, flag it, and provide an extra layer of security for federal networks.
Brian, in the few minutes that we have left, I want to get a bit of a round robin from the group here. Ideally, on looking into your crystal ball, what does the future of securing the nation's network looks like? What should agencies or organizations be focused on that we haven't covered already?
So thanks, I appreciate it. All right, over the past several years, federal agencies have made tremendous progress in strengthening their defenses. With that said, cyber attacks on federal government networks are increasingly more sophisticated, frequent, and aggressive. And this evolving threat environment is no more evident than the recent cyber campaigns that we've experienced in the past year and a half. We ended 2020 with one of the most sophisticated supply chain compromises to date. Since then, we've issued 6 emergency directives and 1 binding operational directive that requires action on the part of the federal agencies to mitigate critical cyber risks. These directives have further highlighted that our federal government networks are on the front lines of cyber attacks against our nation. And in the face of this constant and evolving threat environment, it is essential that we think of the federal government as an enterprise. Part of this enterprise mentality and to better manage our risks, there's a need for greater visibility, shared services, and cost-effective capabilities. And that's where CISA comes in. We provide federal civilian departments, agencies, and our partners like Devon the tools and guidance and reporting capabilities and assistance and a new online platform to better manage their vulnerabilities. How exactly? We provide tools to safeguard the civilian executive branch through the Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program and the National Cybersecurity Protection System, which includes the Einstein capabilities. We can help measure and motivate agencies to implement the policies, directives, standards, and guidelines, and serve as a hub of information sharing and incident reporting. We also provide operational technical assistance, including threat information dissemination and risk vulnerability assessments, as well as incident response services. We're also dedicated to helping federal agencies modernize their networks and accelerate their adoption of cloud, mobile, and emerging technologies. And back to my earlier theme of where things change and where they don't. The underlying technologies we're using to provide our services may be changing, but our need for the high quality cybersecurity outcomes does not. And working together in partnership is the only way to achieve it.
Devon, what about you? What's emerging? What's on the horizon? What are you focused on next?
So I agree with Brian over there. CISA is a great partner. For us, is really, before we jump into the journey, let's fully get into the journey, it's the identification, identifying the software that we have, the hardware that we have, the data that we have, where's that data at, and helping to secure that workload and crafting that plan for zero trust around it. So for us, again, it starts with ground zero, identifying, and then moving forward with actually deploying the technology is going to help us to secure our environment, and then staying in communication with our partners at CISA and Treasury, as well as other bureaus, really understand what they're doing and making sure that our plan aligns with their plan as well too. Again, I think he said it perfectly. As a holistic as well as a federated approach to security, it's not just what MIT's going to do, it's what MIT's going to do inside of the federal space.
What's that look like in industry, Owen?
So I think as industry partners, what we can do best is support the federal government as it continues its transition to a zero trust type of environment. This is a very different type of paradigm, I would say, for federal cybersecurity professionals. Since the passage of FISMA more than a decade ago, the federal climate has been one of compliance, right? When you are implementing a particular FISMA environment, you get a checklist of the controls that you have to have in place, and then you check off and making sure that you've met all of them, and you have a plan to meet all of them. Zero trust is one that is risk aware and is around understanding what are the risks to me and the risks to the data that are very important to the mission of my agency. And as an industry partner, what we're looking to do is help agencies have that conversation about where is the critical data, how could it be extracted by a malefactor, and how do we make sure that we block off the most likely avenues for that. Because let's face it, every single agency is going to need a different strategy for implementing zero trust. It's not so much about the end state, but how do you get there, and how do you maximize your security as you get to that end state.
Well, great insight. Owen Rogers, AT&T. Good to see you again, sir.
Thanks, George.
And Devon Tyler, U.S. Mint. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks, George.
Joining us remotely, Brian Gattoni at CISA. Brian, thanks.
Thank you, George. Thanks for hosting the conversation. It's an important part of this partnership.
Absolutely. And thank you, another important part of this conversation, the audience, for tuning in. I hope you learned new approaches to network security from this incredible panel of experts. To read more of the original expert dialogue on this topic, please visit our resource center. For GovExec, I'm George Jackson. Have a great day.